In the twilight of my years, I find myself compelled to set forth upon this parchment the nightmarish events that have befallen me. My hand trembles as I write, for the very act of recollection threatens to shatter what remains of my sanity. Yet I must persevere, if only to warn others of the eldritch horrors that lurk beyond the veil of our mundane existence. My name is Nathaniel Blackwood, and I was once a respected professor of archaeology at Miskatonic University. My life was one of quiet academia, devoted to the study of ancient civilizations and their esoteric practices. Little did I know that my bloodline harbored a terrible secret, one that would drag me into the depths of cosmic terror and irrevocably alter the course of my existence. It began with the death of my great-uncle Ezekiel Blackwood, a reclusive figure whom I had never met. I received word of his passing through a terse telegram, accompanied by a letter from his solicitor informing me that I was the sole heir to his estate. Curiosity, that most dangerous of human traits, compelled me to abandon my comfortable life in Arkham and journey to the remote coastal village of Kingsport, where my ancestor had spent his final days. The journey was arduous, a portent of the tribulations to come. As the train wound its way through the New England countryside, I found myself plagued by unsettling dreams. Visions of impossible geometries and vast alien landscapes haunted my slumber, leaving me feeling drained and disoriented upon waking. I attributed these nocturnal disturbances to the stress of travel and the uncertainty of what awaited me at my journey's end. Kingsport proved to be a dreary hamlet, perched precariously on the edge of a rocky promontory that jutted into the Atlantic. The few locals I encountered regarded me with a mixture of suspicion and barely concealed fear, their eyes darting away whenever I attempted to engage them in conversation. The air was thick with the scent of brine and decay, and an oppressive silence seemed to hang over the entire village like a funeral shroud. My great-uncle's estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion known as Blackwood Manor, loomed over the village from its perch atop the highest cliff. As I approached the wrought iron gates, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes. The overgrown gardens whispered with each gust of wind, and I swore I could hear faint, discordant melodies carried on the breeze. The solicitor, a cadaverous man named Jeremiah Crow, met me at the entrance. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes sunken into dark hollows that spoke of sleepless nights and unspeakable terrors. With trembling hands, he presented me with a set of ancient keys and a sealed envelope. "Your great-uncle's final instructions," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "I implore you, Mr. Blackwood, to consider carefully before you accept this inheritance. There are things in this world that man was not meant to know, forces that defy comprehension and sanity alike." I dismissed his warnings as the ramblings of a superstitious old man, eager to explore my newfound property and uncover the secrets of my family's past. Oh, how I wish I had heeded his words and fled that accursed place while I still had the chance. The interior of Blackwood Manor was a labyrinth of shadows and dust. Faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors adorned the walls, their eyes seeming to follow my every move. The air was thick with the musty odor of aged tomes and the faint cloying scent of something I could not quite identify. As I made my way through the winding corridors, I could not shake the sensation that the very house was alive, watching and waiting with malevolent intent. In the study, I found a veritable treasure trove of arcane knowledge. Shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes, their spines emblazoned with titles in languages I had never encountered in all my years of scholarly pursuits. Ancient artifacts from forgotten cultures cluttered every available surface, each piece radiating an aura of otherworldly menace. With trembling hands, I broke the seal on the envelope Crow had given me and unfolded the letter within. The spidery handwriting of my great-uncle sprawled across the yellowed parchment, its contents sending a chill down my spine. "My dear Nathaniel, if you are reading this, then I have at last shuffled off this mortal coil and joined our ancestors in the great beyond. Do not mourn my passing, for death is but a doorway to realms beyond human comprehension. You have been chosen, as I was before you, to bear the weight of our family's legacy. The Blackwood bloodline is ancient, stretching back to times before recorded history. We are the keepers of forbidden knowledge, the guardians of gateways to dimensions beyond mortal ken. In the cellar of this house you will find a door sealed with eldritch sigils. Behind it lies the truth of our heritage and the key to unlocking the secrets of the cosmos. But be warned, nephew, for such knowledge comes at a terrible price. The shadows whisper of things that should not be, and once you have gazed into the abyss, it will forever gaze back into you. Should you choose to accept this burden, speak the words inscribed upon the amulet in the rightmost drawer of my desk. But know this: once spoken, there can be no turning back. The path you set upon will lead you to the very edges of sanity and beyond. The choice, dear Nathaniel, is yours. May whatever gods that be have mercy on your soul. Your devoted great-uncle, Ezekiel Blackwood. I read and reread the letter, my mind reeling from its implications. Surely this must be some elaborate jest, a final eccentricity from a man driven mad by isolation. And yet, a part of me thrilled at the possibility that there might be some truth to his words. Had I not devoted my life to the pursuit of knowledge, to unraveling the mysteries of the ancient world? With trembling hands, I opened the drawer and found the amulet my great-uncle had mentioned. It was a curious thing, a disc of some unknown metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the dim light of the study. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, twisting and writhing before my eyes in a way that defied explanation. For hours I sat in that musty study, the amulet clutched in my hand as I wrestled with the decision before me. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to flee, to return to the safety and sanity of my life in Arkham. But the siren call of forbidden knowledge proved too strong to resist. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the grimy windows, I made my choice. With a voice hoarse from disuse, I spoke the words inscribed upon the amulet. Fanglui mangalwanaf kthuluraliye wagahanaglavtagn. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The very air around me seemed to ripple and distort, as if reality itself was tearing at the seams. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened and writhed, taking on impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to behold. And from somewhere deep beneath the house I heard a sound that chilled me to my very core. The grinding of ancient stone as a long sealed door swung open. Gripped by a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity, I stumbled from the study and made my way towards the cellar stairs. The entire house seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the walls themselves seeming to breathe and shift in my peripheral vision. As I descended into the darkness below, I could not shake the feeling that I was leaving behind not just the physical world, but the very laws of nature that had governed my existence. The cellar was a vast, cavernous space that seemed to stretch far beyond the physical dimensions of the house above. Shadows danced at the edge of my lantern's feeble light, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something far more alien. At the far end of the chamber I saw it, a massive door of black stone, covered in glowing sigils that pulsed with an unholy light. As I approached, I felt a presence stirring behind that eldritch portal. Something vast and incomprehensible was awakening, its consciousness brushing against my own like the tentacles of some cosmic leviathan. I knew, with a certainty that transcended mere human knowledge, that I stood at the threshold of revelations that would forever alter my perception of reality. With a trembling hand, I reached out to touch the ancient stone. The moment my fingers made contact, a surge of eldritch energy coursed through my body. Visions of impossible cities and vast alien vistas flooded my mind. I saw creatures of such cosmic horror that my sanity began to fray at the edges, and I understood at last the true nature of the universe and humanity's insignificant place within it. As I collapsed to the cold stone floor, my mind overwhelmed by the torrent of forbidden knowledge, I heard the whispers. They came from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony of voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization. They spoke of ancient pacts and coming apocalypses, of sleeping gods and the true history of our world. I do not know how long I lay there, lost in that maelstrom of cosmic revelations. When I finally regained some semblance of consciousness, I found myself back in the study, the first light of dawn streaming through the windows. Had it all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and the oppressive atmosphere of the old house? But as I rose on unsteady feet, I caught sight of my reflection in a tarnished mirror. My hair had turned stark white, and my eyes held a haunted look that I knew would never fade. In that moment, I understood that my life as I had known it was over. I had set foot upon a path from which there could be no return, a journey into realms of knowledge and terror that would consume the remainder of my days. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the study of my great-uncle's arcane library. I pored over tome after forbidden tome, each revelation leading me deeper into a labyrinth of cosmic horror. The locals avoided me entirely now, crossing themselves and averting their eyes whenever I ventured into the village for supplies. But I cared little for their superstitions, for I had glimpsed truths that rendered their petty fears insignificant. I had seen the vast gulfs between the stars and the beings that dwelt there, waiting for the day when the stars would align and they could once again walk the earth. I had learned of the great old ones and the cult that worshipped them in secret throughout the ages, and always I heard the whispers. They came to me in my dreams and in my waking hours, a constant reminder of the knowledge I had gained and the terrible price I had paid for it. They spoke of a coming awakening, of a time when the barriers between worlds would weaken, and those who slumbered would stir once more. As I sit here now penning these words by the guttering light of a candle, I can feel the change coming. The very air seems charged with an otherworldly energy, and the shadows in the corners of my study writhe with a life of their own. I know that soon, very soon, the stars will align and the great old ones will rise from their aeons-long slumber, and I, Nathaniel Blackwood, last of my cursed bloodline, will be there to witness the end of all things. For I have seen beyond the veil, and there can be no unknowing of such terrible truths. As the whispers grow louder and the shadows deepen, I cling to the last shreds of my sanity and await the cosmic dawn that will herald humanity's final night. But my tale does not end here, dear reader. For the horrors I have witnessed and the knowledge I have gained are but the beginning of a journey into realms of terror beyond mortal comprehension. In the depths of Blackwood Manor, ancient forces stir, and the true nature of my family's legacy is yet to be fully revealed. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, I found myself slipping deeper into the abyss of forbidden knowledge that my great-uncle had left behind. The whispers that had once been a mere nuisance now became a constant companion, their eldritch utterances filling every waking moment and haunting my increasingly fitful slumbers. I knew I was teetering on the precipice of madness, and yet I could not bring myself to turn back from the path I had chosen. It was on a particularly stormy night, as gale-force winds howled around the eaves of Blackwood Manor, that I made a discovery that would plunge me even further into the realms of cosmic horror. While poring over one of Ezekiel's journals, I came across a series of cryptic references to something he called the Codex of Shadows. According to his fevered scribblings, this tome contained rituals and incantations that could open gateways to dimensions beyond human comprehension. Seized by a manic fervor, I tore through the study, searching every nook and cranny for this elusive text. As lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes, I noticed something odd about the large portrait of my great-uncle that hung above the fireplace. In the brief moments of illumination, I could have sworn I saw the painted eyes move, following my frenzied movements. With trembling hands, I approached the portrait and ran my fingers along its ornate frame. As I did so, I felt a slight give in one section, followed by the soft click of a hidden mechanism. The portrait swung outward on concealed hinges, revealing a small alcove behind it. There, nestled in the shadows, lay a book unlike any I had ever seen. Its cover was fashioned from some material that seemed to absorb light, creating a void in the very fabric of reality. Strange, alien symbols writhed across its surface, constantly shifting and changing in a way that made my eyes water and my head spin. I reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers made contact with its unearthly binding, a jolt of energy surged through my body. Visions of impossible geometries and vast, alien landscapes flooded my mind. I saw great cyclopean cities built by beings that defied description, heard the thunderous footsteps of entities so massive they could crush worlds beneath their feet. When I came to my senses, I found myself sprawled on the floor of the study, the codex clutched tightly to my chest. Outside, the storm had reached a fever pitch, the wind's howl taking on an almost sentient quality, as if the very elements were reacting to the eldritch power I had unleashed. With shaking hands, I opened the codex and began to read. The text within was written in no earthly language, and yet I found that I could understand it perfectly. It spoke of ancient pacts between humanity and cosmic entities, of sacrifices made and terrible prices paid. But more than that, it contained instructions for rituals that could tear open the veil between worlds and allow those who dwelt beyond to enter our realm. As I delved deeper into the Codex's blasphemous contents, I became aware of a presence in the room with me. At first, it was nothing more than a feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. But as the night wore on, it grew more tangible. Shadows seemed to deepen and move of their own accord, and more than once I caught glimpses of shapes at the edge of my vision that vanished when I turned to look at them directly. The whispers, too, grew louder and more insistent. They spoke of the coming of the great old ones, of a time when the stars would align and the barriers between worlds would weaken. And they spoke of my role in this cosmic drama, of the blood that flowed through my veins and the destiny that awaited me. As dawn broke, casting its pale light over the study, I realized that I had spent the entire night poring over the Codex. My mind reeled from the revelations contained within its pages, and I knew that I could never again view the world in the same way. The veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I saw now the true nature of reality. A vast, uncaring cosmos populated by entities so far beyond human comprehension that to merely glimpse them was to risk one's sanity. In the days that followed, I threw myself into preparing for the ritual described in the Codex. I gathered the necessary components, some mundane, others so arcane and terrible that I dared not dwell on their origins. All the while, the presence in the house grew stronger. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and I often found myself talking to empty rooms, carrying on conversations with entities I could not see but whose presence I could feel with every fiber of my being. The locals began to avoid Blackwood Manor entirely. On my increasingly rare trips into the village, I would catch sight of curtains hurriedly drawn as I passed, hear the murmur of fearful prayers, and see protective sigils etched onto doorways. But their fear meant nothing to me now. I had glimpsed truths that rendered their petty superstitions laughable. As the day of the ritual drew near, my dreams became even more vivid and terrifying. I found myself walking through vast, alien landscapes, my feet sinking into ground that pulsed with an unholy life of its own. Titanic shapes moved in the distance, their forms so utterly alien that my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. In one particularly haunting dream, I stood before a great cyclopean door of black stone. Carved into its surface were symbols that hurt to look upon, twisting and writhing in a way that defied the laws of physics. As I watched, the door began to open, revealing a void beyond that was alive with stars and unspeakable horrors. A voice vast and terrible echoed through my mind. "The way is prepared, Nathaniel Blackwood. You who bear the blood of the covenant, open the gate and usher in the new age." I awoke from this dream drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers had reached a fever pitch, a constant stream of eldritch knowledge pouring into my mind. I knew then that the time had come. The stars were right, and the ritual must be performed. With feverish intensity, I began the preparations. In the cellar of Blackwood Manor, I cleared a large space and began to draw the intricate patterns described in the Codex. The chalk I used seemed to glow with an inner light, the lines pulsing in time with some cosmic heartbeat. As I worked, I became aware of movement in the shadows around me. Shapes flitted at the edge of my vision, growing bolder with each passing moment. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger for what was to come. The ritual itself was a blur of chanted words in languages that had been old when the earth was young, of symbols drawn in substances I dared not name, and of sacrifices that would have turned my stomach had I not been so far gone in my cosmic madness. As I spoke the final words, my voice hoarse and barely recognizable, I felt a great shift in the very fabric of reality. The air in the cellar grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. The shadows began to coalesce, taking on forms that my mind struggled to comprehend. And there, in the center of the ritual circle, a tear began to form in the very fabric of space and time. Through this eldritch portal, I caught glimpses of a realm beyond human comprehension. Great cities of non-Euclidean geometry stretched as far as the eye could see, populated by beings that defied description. and in the distance, I saw something stirring. Something so vast and terrible that my sanity began to fray at the mere sight of it. As the portal widened, tendrils of darkness began to reach through, probing the air of the cellar like the appendages of some cosmic horror. The whispers in my mind had become a deafening roar, and I could feel the presence of the great old ones pressing against the thinning veil between worlds. It was then, as I stood on the precipice of unleashing forces beyond mortal ken, that a moment of clarity cut through my madness. What had I done? What horrors was I about to unleash upon an unsuspecting world? The weight of my actions came crashing down upon me, and I realized the true cost of the knowledge I had gained. With the last shred of my willpower, I began to recite the words of closure, struggling against the eldritch forces that sought to silence me. The entities beyond the portal howled in fury, their cries shaking the very foundations of Blackwood Manor. The shadows in the cellar writhed and lashed out, leaving burning welts where they touched my skin. As I spoke the final word, there was a great, terrible silence. For a moment, everything hung in perfect stillness. Then, with a sound like the tearing of reality itself, the portal collapsed in upon itself. The sudden rush of air knocked me off my feet, and I lay there on the cold stone floor, my mind reeling from what I had experienced. How long I remained there, I cannot say. When I finally gathered the strength to rise, I found the cellar transformed. The intricate patterns I had drawn were scorched into the stone, still smoldering with an otherworldly energy. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and something far more alien. As I stumbled back up to the main house, I became aware of a change within myself. The whispers that had been my constant companion were now silent, but in their place was a knowledge that burned in my mind like a cold fire. I had glimpsed truths that no mortal was meant to know, had stood at the threshold of realms beyond human comprehension. The following days passed in a haze of feverish writing. I filled journal after journal with accounts of what I had seen and learned, knowing that I must preserve this knowledge even as it threatened to consume me entirely. The Codex of Shadows lay on my desk, its presence a constant reminder of the power it contained and the dangers of seeking knowledge not meant for mortal minds. But even as I wrote, I could feel something stirring in the depths of Blackwood Manor. The ritual may have been interrupted, the portal closed, but the barriers between worlds had been weakened. Something had taken notice of our realm, and I feared it was only a matter of time before it found a way to cross over. Strange occurrences became commonplace in the house. Objects would move of their own accord. Doors would open and close without any visible cause. At night, I would hear sounds echoing through the halls, footsteps where there should be none, whispers in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. The locals, who had long avoided Blackwood Manor, now refused to come anywhere near the property. Tales began to spread through the village of strange lights seen in the windows at night, of unearthly sounds carried on the wind. Some claimed to have seen monstrous shapes moving behind the curtains, their forms too terrible to describe. As for myself, I found that I could no longer leave the confines of the manor. Each time I attempted to venture beyond its gates, a wave of terror would wash over me, accompanied by visions of cosmic horrors that left me paralyzed with fear. I had become a prisoner in my own home, trapped by forces beyond my control, and yet even as I penned these words, I could not bring myself to regret the path I had chosen. The knowledge I had gained, terrible though it was, had opened my eyes to the true nature of reality. I had seen beyond the veil, and there could be no going back. But the story does not end here, dear reader. For even now, as I sit in the study of Blackwood Manor, surrounded by the arcane tomes and eldritch artifacts of my ancestors, I can feel a presence stirring. Something is coming, drawn by the power unleashed in that ill-fated ritual. And I fear that when it arrives, the true horror of my family's legacy will finally be revealed. As I put quill to parchment for what may well be the final time, I can feel the very foundations of Blackwood Manor trembling beneath me. The air is thick with an otherworldly miasma, and the shadows that dance at the corners of my vision have taken on a life of their own. I know now that the end is near, not just for me, but perhaps for all of humanity. In the weeks following the failed ritual, I had foolishly believed that I had averted catastrophe. The portal had been closed, the cosmic entities denied entry into our realm. But as the days wore on, I came to realize the terrible truth. I had not prevented their coming, merely delayed it. The barrier between worlds had been irreparably weakened, and now something was clawing its way through the cracks. It began with small disturbances, books flying from shelves of their own accord, furniture rearranging itself in the night. But soon, the manifestations grew more troubling. I would wake to find eldritch symbols carved into the walls, glowing with an inner light that hurt to look upon. The mirrors in the manor began to reflect impossible vistas, alien landscapes that could not exist. And then the dreams began anew. No longer was I a mere observer of cosmic horrors. Now I found myself an active participant in vast, incomprehensible rituals. I walked through cyclopean cities that defied the laws of physics, their non-Euclidean geometry twisting my mind into knots. Massive, tentacled beings loomed over me, their very presence threatening to shatter my sanity. But worst of all were the whispers. They had returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. They spoke of ancient pacts and coming apocalypses, of the true history of our world and humanity's insignificant place in the grand cosmic order. And always, always they spoke of my role in the events to come. "You are the key, Nathaniel Blackwood," they hissed in the dark recesses of my mind. "The last of your bloodline, the culmination of centuries of preparation. Through you the great old ones shall return, and the world of man shall be remade in their image." I tried to resist, to shut out their poisonous whispers, but it was futile. The knowledge I had gained from the Codex of Shadows had opened my mind to truths I could not unlearn, and I found myself drawn inexorably towards a fate I both feared and, in my darkest moments, longed for. As the days blurred into weeks, I lost all sense of time. The windows of Blackwood Manor showed vistas that changed with each glance, sometimes the stormy coast of Kingsport, other times alien worlds bathed in the light of dying suns. Reality itself seemed to be unraveling around me, the laws of nature bending and breaking under the weight of the cosmic forces pressing against the thinning veil. It was during one of my increasingly rare moments of lucidity that I made a discovery that chilled me to my very core. While searching through my great-uncle's personal papers, I came across a family tree that stretched back far beyond recorded history. As I traced the Blackwood lineage through the centuries, I noticed a pattern emerging, a pattern that spoke of careful breeding and selection over millennia. With dawning horror, I realized the truth of my heritage. The Blackwood line had been cultivated for a single purpose: to produce a vessel capable of channeling the power of the great old ones. Every marriage, every birth, every death had been orchestrated to create the perfect conduit between our world and theirs. And I, Nathaniel Blackwood, was the culmination of that grand and terrible design. As this realization washed over me, I felt something shift within the very fabric of my being. It was as if a door that had been locked tight suddenly swung open, flooding my consciousness with eldritch energy. The whispers in my mind crescendoed to a deafening roar, and I found myself speaking in languages that no human tongue was meant to utter. The manor itself seemed to respond to this awakening. The walls began to pulse with an unholy light, and I could hear the sound of stone grinding against stone as hidden chambers and passageways revealed themselves. From the depths of the cellar came a low, sonorous humming that set my teeth on edge and caused the air to vibrate with potent energy, drawn by some instinct I could not name. I made my way down to the cellar. The stairs seemed to stretch on far longer than they should have, descending into depths that should not have existed beneath the manor. As I reached the bottom, I found myself in a vast cavern that dwarfed the house above. At the center of this impossible space stood an altar of black stone, covered in symbols that writhed and shifted before my eyes. And there, lying upon the altar, was the Codex of Shadows. As I approached, the book opened of its own accord, its pages flipping rapidly as if blown by some unfelt wind. I knew then what I had to do. With trembling hands, I took up the codex and began to read aloud. The words flowed from my lips without conscious thought, a stream of eldritch syllables that echoed through the cavern and seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. As I chanted, the air around me began to thicken and distort. The shadows at the edges of the cavern deepened and took on impossible forms, writhing tentacles and grasping claws reaching out towards me. The ground beneath my feet shuddered and heaved, and I could hear the sound of something vast stirring in the depths below. A wind that smelled of alien stars and the void between worlds whipped around me, growing stronger with each passing moment. The symbols on the altar began to glow with an inner light, pulsing in time with the rhythm of my chant. And then, with a sound like the tearing of reality itself, a rift began to open in the air before me. Through this eldritch portal, I caught glimpses of realms beyond human comprehension. I saw great cities built by beings that defied description, their architecture an affront to the laws of physics. I saw vast empty spaces between the stars, populated by entities so large that planets were but motes of dust to them. And I saw something stirring in the darkness, something so vast and terrible that my mind recoiled from the very sight of it. As the portal widened, I felt a presence pressing against the thinning veil between worlds. The great old ones, those cosmic entities that had slumbered for eons, were awakening. And through me, through the Blackwood bloodline, they would enter our world once more. In that moment, as I stood on the precipice of unleashing forces beyond mortal ken, a moment of clarity cut through the madness that had consumed me. I saw with terrible lucidity the consequences of what I was about to do. The world as we knew it would end, replaced by a reality so alien and horrific that humanity would be driven to extinction or worse. With the last shred of my will, I fought against the eldritch energies coursing through me. I tried to close the book, to stop the chant that poured from my lips. But it was too late. The ritual had taken on a life of its own, fueled by the cosmic forces that now surged through the weakened barrier between worlds. The portal continued to expand, and I could feel the presence of the great old ones growing stronger with each passing second. The cavern shook with their approach, stones falling from the ceiling as reality itself began to warp and twist around me. And then, just as I thought all hope was lost, I remembered something. A passage from one of my great-uncle's journals, speaking of a failsafe built into the very foundations of Blackwood Manor. A last resort, to be used only in the direst of circumstances. With what little strength I had left, I raised my voice in a new chant, the words torn from the deepest recesses of my memory. As I spoke, I felt a surge of power unlike anything I had experienced before. The very stones of the manor seemed to resonate with my words, and I could feel centuries of accumulated eldritch energy responding to my call. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ground beneath my feet began to crack and split, fissures racing across the cavern floor. The walls shuddered and began to collapse, massive chunks of stone raining down around me. The portal, which had been on the verge of admitting the great old ones into our world, began to fluctuate wildly, its edges fraying and dissolving. I could hear the howls of cosmic entities thwarted in their attempt to cross over, their fury shaking the very foundations of reality. The codex of shadows burst into eldritch flames in my hands, its forbidden knowledge consumed in a conflagration of otherworldly fire. As Blackwood Manor collapsed around me, pulling the weakened dimensional barriers down with it, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. I had failed in my duty as a Blackwood, had rejected the destiny that had been crafted for me over millennia. But in doing so, I had perhaps saved humanity from a fate worse than extinction. The last thing I remember is the floor giving way beneath me, plunging me into an abyss that seemed to have no bottom. As I fell, I caught one final glimpse of the portal as it collapsed in on itself, taking with it the threat of the great old ones. At least for now. I do not know how long I fell, or how I survived the destruction of Blackwood Manor. When I regained consciousness, I found myself washed up on the rocky shore below the cliffs where the house had once stood. Of the manor itself, there was no sign. Only a smoking crater remained where it had once loomed over the village of Kingsport. In the days that followed, as I recovered from my ordeal, I learned that the destruction of Blackwood Manor had not gone unnoticed. The ground tremors had been felt for miles around, and witnesses spoke of strange lights in the sky and unearthly sounds carried on the wind. But of the true nature of what had nearly come to pass, the world remained blissfully ignorant. And so I come to the end of my tale, dear reader. I write these words not knowing if they will ever be read, not knowing if I will live to see another dawn. For though I have thwarted the plans of the great old ones, I fear that my actions have only delayed the inevitable. The barriers between worlds have been weakened, and there are other bloodlines, other cults that seek to bring about the return of those cosmic horrors. As for myself, I am a man out of time and out of place. The knowledge I have gained has set me apart from my fellow humans, and I find that I can no longer walk among them without seeing the shadows of greater truths lurking behind the veil of reality. I am drawn now to the far corners of the earth, seeking out other sites of eldritch power, other manifestations of the cosmic forces that nearly destroyed everything. Perhaps in time I will find a way to strengthen the barriers between worlds, to undo the damage that my ancestors and I have wrought. Or perhaps I am merely postponing the inevitable, fighting against cosmic tides that will eventually overwhelm us all. But know this: should these words ever find their way to you, the world is far stranger and more terrible than you can imagine. Behind the thin veneer of reality lie horrors beyond human comprehension, entities that regard our entire existence as little more than a fleeting dream. And though I have turned aside from the path laid out for me by my ancestors, I fear that others will rise to take my place. So I leave you with this warning, etched in ink and sealed with what remains of my sanity. Beware the shadows that whisper, for in their eldritch utterances lie truths that can shatter minds and reshape worlds. The stars are aligning, the old ones are stirring, and the fate of all humanity hangs in the balance. May whatever gods that be have mercy on us all. The end.